Hi. Today I'm going to share with you a cool little way to share the gospel in a Chinese cultural context. It's a little tool that we developed, some friends and I developed when I was at a training in Portland. This training was super cool. It was my favorite educational experience to date, my favorite learning environment that I've ever been in, and it was designed this way, right? This course built a series of experiences for you, and you lived together in this big dormitory, you and all these other people that were doing this training. And your task was to crack Chinese culture, to work your way through the behavioral patterns of the Chinese population that you were working in. There's a huge Chinese population in Portland. You work your way through the behavioral codes and signals that they send you so you can understand what they're trying to convey when they communicate with each other and when they communicate with people outside of their cultural circles. To get down underneath that, underneath those behaviors, down through things like the authorities that they recognize and the experiences that they feel that they've shared that have shaped them, all the way down to their dominant values. And you craft a way of conveying the message of the gospel that would strike close to the center, the core of the Chinese heart, right? They chose Chinese culture because there's so many huge Chinese immigrant population in Portland. And this was so much fun, okay? So in this video, I'm going to talk about a handful of things that we learned about Chinese culture and then show you how we tried to convey the gospel to Chinese counterparts, okay? So here's some things about Chinese culture that we learned that were really fun. One was their orientation toward time. The Chinese orientation toward time is very different from the North American orientation toward time. North Americans are very attendant to the immediate present and the immediate future. Our memory is short, especially American, like United States of America, American North Americans. Our memory is really short. Our country is like barely 200 years old. Chinese culture is 5,000 years old, right? When I was in college, China was making some overtures toward kind of retaking Taiwan as part of China proper. And Taiwan was very nervous about that, and there were some agreements between Taiwan and other foreign governments that were expiring that were protecting Taiwan originally. There was a Chinese kid in my class, in the class I was in, as a biology class, I think. And everyone looked at him and they're like, hey, do you think China is going to militarily invade Taiwan? And he says to us, he says, you are so young. Your culture is 200 years old. We are 5,000 years old. We are not in a hurry. We all just laughed out loud at the ridiculous narrowness of our concept of time, like everything happens right now. For the Chinese, everything happens over a long period of time. There was a guy that we met that knows a guy whose business is essentially putting big pieces of marble in a pond and taking other big pieces of marble out of the pond. So this pond is mineral rich, and you put the marble in, and the minerals in the water stain the marble, deep in the marble. It's really amazing. You have these beautiful, amazing tie-dye looking pieces of marble that are used in very expensive buildings all over China. The rocks that he gets out of that pond are rocks that his grandfather put in that pond. And the rocks that he puts in, his grandson will remove. This is a family business, and the turnover rate on product is every 2 generations, right? That's a deep past, deep future orientation. So, like discussions of the gospel that are about a sin you committed yesterday and what will happen to you right after you die really don't they really don't answer the questions that the Chinese are asking. So this is another description of the questions that the Chinese are asking. When we talk about culture, there's a continuum. There are several continua. One of them is the individual communal continuum. Is a culture more oriented toward the individual, what the individual does, the individual's rights, the individual's responsibilities? Or is it oriented toward the community's rights, the community's responsibilities, what the community does, who the community is? Does an individual think of themselves as them, me? Or do they think of themselves primarily in the context of us? Does what happened to them personally, is it experienced as their personal experience or as something that happened to us? Is what happened to us, even if it never happened to me, do I carry that like it happened to me? That's a communal culture, and an individual culture is like you stand on your own feet, it happened to you, it didn't happen to you, it's your choice, it's not your choice, go make it on your own. The United States, individual. individualist, China very communal. And their dominant core value, the thing that they feel the universe needs, the thing that they feel they need most, is harmony. One of the proverbs that a Chinese friend said to me was, it's actually not so much a proverb as it is just a little piece of wisdom about how to manage relationships. And when discussing whether or not to confront a friend about a serious offense, the question that he asked himself, that he says he was taught to ask himself, that all his Chinese counterparts where he was from, the village he's from, asked themselves is, will this matter in 20 years? And if that particular offense won't matter in 20 years, then you have no business bringing it up, because to disrupt harmony for something that won't matter in 20 years is silly. It's nothing. If you won't remember it in 20 years and it won't be a major dominant issue in your relationship, then it's not an issue at all, and you should just leave it be, because they really care about harmony. The reasoning patterns are circular. So the sense of how story develops or where things are going. In North America, there's a notion of progress, like things are going forward in a line, right? And they're moving linearly toward a better future, maybe. Or if you're watching lots of post-apocalyptic movies and reading novels like that, then they were going like this, and then they're all eventually going like that to end of the world. For the Chinese, it's not a line. It's a circle. Things happen, and then the wheel comes back around. They'll happen again. The wheel comes back around. It'll happen again. And it'll happen in each generation, or every 3 generations, or every 5 generations. But it's a circle. And that's both good news and bad news. There's the inescapable meaninglessness of the circle. But then there's also if you miss it this time, you'll get on next time around. It's all right. And then ideographic writing. So the written signal system in China is not phonetic. So they don't write sounds. They write ideas. I remember watching this cool movie called Hero. I think it was called Hero. And it was a Jet Li movie. I'm a martial artist. I love me some kung fu movies. And one of these guys, one of the characters, he was a swordsman, and he just got tired of killing people. So he retires to this calligraphy school. And calligraphy is a big, big deal in China and Japan. Not just because writing things is pretty, but because it's like a form of philosophy and poetry put together. If you can find a new way or a novel way of making word, what you've done is you've shaped an idea. So in the movie, there are, I think, like 7 ways to write swordsman. You know, like sword man, or sword carrier, or hand of the sword, or cutting man, you know. 7 ways to combine the written idea of cutting and the written idea of man, and you get swordsman. So he came up with the 8th, the mysterious, magical, elusive 8th way of writing swordsman, and it was the man who puts down the sword. The man putting the sword down, which carries both the idea of like, hi-ya! Putting the sword down, but also like giving up the way of violence, the way of the sword, putting it down. There's a big moment in the movie, and the movie like bum 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 kind of turns on this moment. There's a bunch of irony wrapped around that moment, and it's a big deal that the Chinese audience loved, and the American audience is like, when are we going to see some kung fu fighting again? I don't understand this. Because the notion of capturing an idea with the picture and making that itself a word is beautiful. And it's a form of poetry that is kind of not present in non-ideographic languages. Okay? So these are 4 facts that drove us to present the gospel in this particular way, right? Remember that it's an ideographic communication system. It's circular. It's concerned with deep time, the deep past and the deep future. And it's concerned with harmony. All right? So we storied it like this. There was God, and you could not see him. And he was 3 and he was 1, and they lived in perfect harmony. Within God, there was perfect harmony. And God created the universe, and there was perfect harmony. And God created man and woman, and they lived together in perfect harmony. And he put them in a garden, and the garden functioned with the man and the woman and with God in perfect harmony, and all things were related in perfect harmony. And then man sinned. Man rebelled against the empire of God, against the kingship of God, and it shattered the harmony. It broke the story. Now man was no longer harmonious within himself. He was full of shame and confusion about who he was and what was good and what wasn't. And there was no longer harmony between the man and the woman. There was blame. And there was saying, she made me do it and he did it. And there was no longer harmony between man and the creation. The created order no longer gave up, yielded up its fruit effortlessly as he worked. It now fought him tooth and nail. And the creation fought within itself. And man hid from God, and the harmony between man and God was also shattered. And God had to drive him from the garden. Everything was broken. The harmony everywhere, in every relationship, was wrecked. And we have all lived in that disharmonious, unharmonious state ever since. Until God came to us as a man. And in that man, in Jesus, God and man are again harmonized. Fully God and fully man as one, harmonious, putting together again the relationship between God and man. And he lived with us, helping us live with him, helping us live with God. In his death, he destroyed all of the evil that was creating the dissonance between people and people, people and creation, creation and God, God and creation. And in his resurrection, he opened a door to a new future that brings us back to God, reconciling all things to himself. God reconciling all things to himself in Jesus. Not back to the beginning, but back to better, back to more. Back to a universe where God isn't just with us, but God lives in us and we live in God. And all that God is and all that we are interpenetrates one another. And we live in perfect, complete, down to the very atoms of our being, harmony with God and with one another. One body, one spirit. Forever and ever, God's space and our space, the same space. All right, it's an ideogram, right? Super simple. It's a circle with an arrow, a lightning bolt, and a cross, and an empty tomb, right? Simple picture. I don't think it got into the Chinese alphabet. I don't think it ever will. But we presented that to our Chinese counterparts there, believers, and they said, this is beautiful and good. And we're like, yeah, we get an A. But more than the A, it was a fantastic exercise in submitting ourselves to the warp and woof. You probably don't know those words. Submitting ourselves to the contours of a culture and letting it affect us enough that we could feel inside ourselves the questions they might be asking. And then try really hard to answer their questions with what was good and true, with the story that we've been given, that we've been entrusted with. And answer it in the ways that matter to them. So this is an example of contextualizing the message. It's also an example of a particular angle on the gospel, the reconciliation angle. Paul says that we have been made ministers or ambassadors of reconciliation, right? And God was in Christ reconciling the whole of the cosmos to himself. And in Colossians 1, he says that Christ is reconciling everything to himself, and he's either reconciling everything to his goodness and beauty, or he's reconciling everything to his justice and wrath, right? And the human experience is about choosing whether or not you will submit to his reconciliation to goodness and beauty, or where you will be forced to reconcile with his justice and wrath. There's a lot inside that. But for now, take away this. The gospel can be contextualized to an audience if you will submit to that audience and become them enough that you can understand in your belly a little bit the questions that they're living with, even if they're not consciously asking them. And number two, the gospel is about the kingship of Jesus, but it can be presented as a story that isn't only about kingship. It can also be presented in a wider context. And in this particular context, the context is the reharmonization of everything, the reconciliation of all things to God and to one another. All right? One love, peace to you all. God bless.